In The Shadows That Walk Away by J.G. Ballard, the initial observation scene unfolds with an unsettling quietness, setting the tone for the story's eerie and ambiguous nature. The protagonist, an unnamed man, likely a detached observer or researcher, finds himself in a public space, perhaps a park or a sunlit plaza, where the ordinary rhythms of daily life play out under an unremarkable sky. Yet within this mundane setting, something deeply unnatural begins to manifest. His attention is first drawn to the shadows cast by passers-by. At a glance, they appear normal, dark silhouettes stretching or shrinking with the sun's angle. But then, he notices a peculiar lag, a hesitation in their movement. A woman walks briskly past a bench, her shadow trailing behind her, except it doesn't quite follow. Instead, it lingers for a fraction too long, as if resisting the pull of its owner. Then, as she turns a corner and disappears from view, her shadow remains motionless for a beat, before sliding away in a different direction. The protagonist watches, transfixed, as this phenomenon repeats. Another shadow, cast by a man reading a newspaper, shifts slightly even as the man himself sits perfectly still. The disconnect is subtle but undeniable. The shadows are no longer tethered to their originators in the way they should be. They move with a sluggish, almost deliberate quality, as if animated by some unseen force. What unsettles him most is that no one else seems to notice. The people continue their routines, chatting, walking, sitting, utterly unaware that their own shadows are behaving strangely. The protagonist's scientific or analytical instincts, if he has any, are immediately engaged. He tries to rationalize it, a trick of the light, a flaw in his own vision. But the more he watches, the more he realizes this is no illusion. The shadows are defying physics, drifting away from their owners as though they have wills of their own. This moment marks the beginning of his obsession. The world, once familiar, now feels unmoored, as if the fundamental rules of reality have loosened. The scene closes with him standing there, caught between fascination and dread, as the shadows continue their slow, silent rebellion against the laws of nature. The story's central mystery, what these shadows are and what they mean, has been set in motion, leaving the reader as unnerved as the protagonist. Would you like a deeper dive into the psychological or symbolic implications of this scene? As the days pass, the protagonist's initial curiosity hardens into something darker, an obsession tinged with quiet dread. What began as a fleeting anomaly, a trick of the light that might have been dismissed, now asserts itself with unsettling persistence. The shadows no longer merely lag behind their owners. They move with a sluggish autonomy, as if testing the boundaries of their newfound independence. He begins to track them with the methodical precision of a scientist, or perhaps a man clinging to reason in the face of the inexplicable. Standing for hours in the same sunlit plaza, he notes how certain shadows peel away entirely, lingering in patches of shade long after the people who cast them have vanished. Others drift in slow, meandering paths, their movements no longer dictated by the angles of the sun, but by some hidden impulse. Once, he sees a cluster of them gathered near a bench, motionless yet somehow waiting, like predators at rest. The more he watches, the more he realizes that these shadows do not behave like mere projections. They do not stretch or shrink with the shifting daylight. Instead, they move with an eerie fluidity, sliding across walls and pavement as if unbound by physics. Some even appear to react. When he steps too close, they shift away, retreating into darker corners as though aware of his scrutiny. And yet, the most unsettling thing is the indifference of the crowd. People stroll past these rogue silhouettes without so much as a glance, their own shadows still, for now, obediently trailing behind them. The protagonist tries to point out the phenomenon to a passerby, but the man only frowns and quickens his step, as if fearing not the shadows, but the wildness in the protagonist's eyes. Isolation creeps in. The world continues its routines, blind to the slow unraveling happening at its edges. He scours books on optics, psychology, even folklore, searching for an explanation, but finds nothing. The shadows defy categorization. They are not hallucinations. He checks, pinching his arm until it bruises. Nor are they any known trick of refraction. They simply are, and their presence gnaws at him, whispering that the universe is not as orderly as he once believed. By night he dreams of them, formless, liquid darkness pooling at the edges of his vision. By day, he watches, heart pounding as they grow bolder. One afternoon, he sees a child's shadow dart ahead of her, pulling her along like a leash. The girl giggles, unaware. The protagonist does not. The unease has taken root. Whatever these things are, they are spreading. And he is beginning to suspect that he is the only one who sees them, not because they aren't real, but because everyone else is already theirs. The protagonist's fascination with the rogue shadows hardens into a desperate need for proof, not just for others, but for himself, because the longer he watches them, the more his grip on reality begins to waver. He arms himself with tools, a camera, a notebook, a measuring tape, as if the language of science could cage the uncanny. At first, he tries to photograph them. He waits in the plaza at high noon, when shadows should be sharp and obedient beneath their owners. But when he develops the film, the images are wrong. The shadows are blurred, smeared across the frame like wet ink, or worse, absent entirely, leaving figures standing in stark, impossible isolation. He wonders if the camera is faulty, but deep down, he knows. The shadows refuse to be captured. Next, he attempts measurement, marking their positions with chalk, tracking their movements against the sun's arc. But they defy geometry. A shadow cast by a lamppost slithers sideways when his back is turned. A man's silhouette stretches impossibly long in the wrong light, then snaps back like elastic. The numbers in his notebook become nonsense, a jumble of contradictions that mock his rationality. He visits the library, scouring texts on optics, psychology, even occult folklore. Maybe it's a mass hallucination, a trick of urban light pollution, or something older, a myth he's forgotten. But the books offer no answers, only dead ends and uneasy parallels. Tales of doppelgangers, lost souls, things that walk without bodies. He reads until his vision swims, and when he steps back into the daylight, the shadows seem thicker, more numerous, as if they've multiplied in his absence. Worse, they've started reacting to him. When he raises his camera, they slide out of frame. When he mutters calculations under his breath, they pause, as if listening. Once, in a cold sweat, he swears one of them, a long, spindled thing, turns its head toward him, though it has no face to turn. The futility of it all coils around him. He's no longer just an observer. He's become a part of the phenomenon, a variable in an experiment he doesn't understand. The shadows are aware of him now. And as his notes devolve into frantic scribbles, as his camera fills with more blanks than proof, he realizes the terrible truth. Some things don't want to be understood. Some things simply are. And they are watching him back. The air grows thick with something unspoken, a tension that hums beneath the surface of everyday life. The protagonist stands at the edge of the plaza, no longer just an observer, but a man caught in the grip of something he cannot name. The shadows no longer merely drift, they behave. Their movements are deliberate now, purposeful in a way that suggests not just independence, but intention. At first, it was subtle. Shadows lingering too long in places they shouldn't be, shifting when no one was near. But now, they defy all logic. They move against the light, slithering up walls like viscous stains, pooling together in corners where the sunlight should have banished them entirely. They no longer mimic the shapes of the people who cast them. Instead, they stretch and contort into forms that are almost, but not quite, human. Limbs elongate, torsos twist, heads tilt at impossible angles. They are becoming something else. The protagonist watches, heart hammering, as a cluster of shadows near the fountain begins to merge. They slide into one another like liquid, forming a single, shifting mass that pulses faintly, as if breathing. For a moment, it holds a shape. Something vaguely humanoid but wrong, its proportions stretched and warped, before dissolving back into fragments that scatter like startled insects. People still pass by, oblivious. A woman steps through one of the wandering shadows as if it were nothing, and the protagonist wants to scream at her, to shake her, and demand how she doesn't see. But the shadow doesn't react to her either. It's as if they exist on separate planes, the shadows and the living, intersecting, but never touching, except for him. He's certain they notice him now. When he walks too close, they recoil or, worse, turn toward him, their edges ripple, their darkness deepening, as if in recognition. Once, in a moment of reckless courage, he reaches out to touch one. His fingers pass through nothing, but the cold that seeps into his skin is real. It lingers long after he pulls away, a numbness that spreads up his arm like frost. At night, he dreams of them, not as flat, shapeless things, but as figures, tall, slender, with limbs that bend too many times. They whisper in a language just beyond hearing, their voices like the rustle of dead leaves. He wakes gasping, his room too dark, the corners too deep. By day, the shadows grow bolder. They no longer hide. They gather in doorways, in alleys, in the spaces between buildings, watching, waiting. And the protagonist knows, with a certainty that chills his bones, that they are not just shadows anymore. They are learning. And soon, they will do more than watch. The air itself seems to hold its breath as the protagonist stands frozen in the plaza, now nearly empty as evening bleeds into dusk. The streetlights flicker on one by one, casting weak, jaundiced pools of illumination that only deepen the surrounding darkness. It is here, in this liminal space between day and night, that the final unraveling begins. All afternoon, he has felt it, the weight of being watched. Not by human eyes, but by something far older, far emptier. The rogue shadows have grown bolder, no longer content to slink at the edges of perception. They cluster in the corners of his vision, twitching like nervous animals, their movements no longer mimicking life, but anticipating it. And then, movement. His own shadow, which should stretch obediently behind him in the sickly light, does not follow as he turns. Instead, it peels itself from the pavement with the slow, deliberate grace of something waking from a long slumber. The protagonist stares, breath trapped in his throat, as the silhouette of his own head cocks to one side, a gesture he did not make. The shadow steps forward, not as a flat imitation, but with impossible depth, rising from the ground like ink given form. It mirrors his shape, yet moves with alien purpose, its edges vibrating with barely restrained energy. When he stumbles back, it does not follow immediately. It considers him. Then it takes another step. Closer. The world narrows to this. The shadow of his own hand lifting, fingers splayed, though his real hand remains clenched at his side. The silhouette's movements are fluid, predatory, a pantomime of intent. He wants to run, but his legs refuse. This is not how shadows behave. This is not how reality behaves. and yet... The shadow leans in, its formless face hovering inches from his own. There is no breath, no sound, but the cold radiating from it is palpable, leaching the warmth from his skin. In that unbearable proximity, he understands. This is no longer his shadow. It never was. Somewhere a streetlight buzzes and dies. The shadow smiles. Then the world fractures, or perhaps it is his mind. And when the protagonist blinks, the plaza is empty. The streetlights hum. His shadow lies flat and ordinary at his feet. But something is different. The air smells of ozone and something older. The light falls wrong. And when he turns to leave, his shadow does not follow. It stays behind, watching him walk away. And this time, he is the one who casts no shadow. The world has become a different place. Or perhaps it was always this way, and he is only now seeing it clearly. The protagonist walks through streets that feel both familiar and alien, the geometry of the city ever so slightly warped, as if the shadows have not just detached, but taken something fundamental with them. The air hums with a low electric tension, a whisper at the edge of hearing that might be the wind or might be something else entirely. He no longer casts a shadow. This absence should be impossible, yet it is undeniable. Light passes through him as though he is the ghost, not the other way around. People move around him, their own shadows clinging dutifully to their heels, but their eyes slide over him, as if he is already fading from their world. He tries to speak, to warn them, but his voice dissolves before it reaches them, swallowed by the growing silence. The rogue shadows are everywhere now. They no longer hide. They slither along walls, pool in doorways, gather in the corners of rooms where the light does not quite reach. They have taken on forms that are almost, but not quite, human, elongated, distorted, their edges flickering like static. They do not approach him. They do not need to. He understands, with a quiet and terrible certainty, that they were never shadows at all. They were something else, something older, wearing the shape of shadows the way a predator might wear the skin of its prey. And now, having shed that disguise, they are free to move as they please. At night, he dreams of vast, dark spaces and things that stir within them. He wakes to find his room darker than it should be, the corners stretching further than geometry allows. Sometimes in the silence, he hears footsteps that are not his own. The story does not end with a revelation or a resolution. It ends with a man walking through a world that no longer recognizes him, his footsteps soundless, his presence unremarked. The shadows do not follow him. They are waiting, and somewhere, in the spaces between light and dark, they are smiling. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.